I won't mention the bank's name, not yet. I still hold hope that they might do the right thing, but I will say, after waging my own personal battle, after all the work I've done, I believe their name is a lie. The fact that this bank is ignoring all the evidence that has been presented, after every letter they wrote, first expressing their condolences, then not too much longer demanding money that had been pre-approved for my mother-in-law, even though I had completed all the paperwork, the fact that the death of the woman they expressed empathy over had literally passed within days of the required paperwork being submitted, I consider that legal, systematic racism and greed. The paperwork was for coronavirus relief, which the same government my new family had paid taxes into over their lives. They've been paid for multiple times with a very generous stimulus package. They didn't stand to gain anything other than more money. I have lost count of the number of times I've written them explaining this, and they never answered me. Why are they doing this? Instead, they just kept demanding the money my mother-in-law was unable to pay during the pandemic, threatening foreclosure if not paid. On the other hand, I was dealing with a separate office within the same bank. We even got the closing paperwork. They requested an unusual amount from everything that I've learned and researched because it was way higher than normal. I'm certain they asked for this much money because they were just certain she couldn't be able to pay it. But she did. Then we mailed it in. They just sat on it for months. Then they started this whole successor interest argument, despite so many obvious indicators pointing out my wife's right to the home she resides in now. I submitted countless letters, actual notarized paperwork. I sent successor and interest proof, from, even including the family's one other sole survivor. Still, the way they responded gave me every reason to believe not only were they not reading any of what I submitted, but they had no intention of allowing my wife to keep her home. $8,000 owed due to COVID, denied because the intended recipient literally died unexpectedly, is an example of corporate greed and racism. Even though there's proof that my wife has lived in and paid on the property in question for almost 24 years. And never missed a payment until COVID is proof enough that she's both a safe credit risk and should be automatically assigned successor in interest. The bank wants to take all the money she paid in for 24 years, the money they were paid before by the stimulus program, take her home, and completely sell it all over again, making even more money. This is an example of corporate greed and, in my opinion, legal racism. I believe it's legal racism because of my own personal experience. They know her family wasn't aware of the laws regarding transfer of home ownership. They're holding on to the whole formality of successor interest thing because it's their way of slowly taking her home and profiting off of her ignorance. I know for a fact that I have family that did far worse with their home once upon a time during a non-pandemic period, and the bank worked with them and they kept their home. I regret to say this, but I believe, knowing what I know now, that my family was allowed to keep their home because their skin wasn't brown, black, or yellow. Last week, a famous model posted a brave statement on social media following a protest in Charlottesville, allegedly calling all white people racist, was leaked to the Daily Mail. Since then, she has received rape threats and death threats, been accused of playing the victim, and been sacked from her L'Oreal campaign that, ironically, celebrates diversity. For the record, I'm white. I don't hate other white people. Lots of my friends are white. Yet the statement, all white people are racist, doesn't make me angry. It makes me sad because it's probably true. Just to be clear, I unequivocally oppose all forms of racism. As a Boy Scout, athlete, Christian, veteran, and husband of an amazing woman who isn't white, who I love more than anyone I've ever loved combined, I feel like an expert on the issue of racism opposition. I've witnessed cases against individuals, companies, and governments for racial discrimination. I've witnessed protests opposing racist policies. I've refused to do business with companies that made racist statements or behaved in a discriminatory fashion. I have verbally called out racist language, even if it meant placing myself at risk. I have pledged support for community groups and organizations championing rights for people of color, and have tried hard to serve them with my own humility. And yes, I have lots of black friends. Like I said, I married a Latin woman because I'm in love with her. I have no other thought to her ethnicity. That doesn't mean my thoughts or actions have never been tarnished by subconscious racial prejudice thought. I know every time I go into some place and I want something that my skin color is like an ID card. He's white, he's safe, but deep down it bothers the core of my soul because I know it's wrong. Too often we seem to think that racism means actively doing or saying something racist. Not so. We live in a society that is built on the spoils of racism, that continues to benefit from inequality in all forms. As that model put it, slavery and colonialism at the hands of white supremacy played a huge part in shaping the U.S. and much of the West, including the U.K., into the superpowers that they are today. Why does that make me a racist, I hear you ask? It comes down to this. In Western society, we are all taught, explicitly or implicitly, that lighter is better. Those racist narratives still exist in the USA today, but you're kidding yourself if you think I've never had a racist thought. Take, for example, the portrayal of black people in media. I was the first person to say, how dare Will, I can't believe Will Smith slapped that guy. He needs to be fired or canceled. But I really didn't give any thought to the whole Harvey Weinstein thing. It didn't bother me that they didn't ban him for 10 years from the Oscars, the Academy Awards. I didn't give any thought to it because subconsciously I know he's white. But I was the first person to jump on Will Smith. And you know what? He apologized. The Christian man that I am knows that you say you're sorry 7 times 70, as many times as you expect me to forgive you. But still, I did it, and I'm ashamed of it. The net effect of the conscious and subconscious racism was reflected in a recent report recreating the landmark doll test of the 1940s. It showed that we are still living in a society where dark things are devalued and white things are valued. In other words, if you grew up in a racist society, through no fault of your own, some of that racism is bound to stick subconsciously. It's an unconscious conspiracy in which we are all complicit unless we fight it. But there's more. There's a lot of evidence to support that claim. For example, you're 6 times more likely to be stopped by the police if you're a minority. Unemployment rates are 2 times as high for ethnic minorities than they are for white people. Minority groups are more likely to experience homelessness, and the number of hate crimes in the U.S. still increased despite the recent events, such as Floyd. Remember Floyd? Our society has structural inequalities that benefit white people over people of color, in the same way that structural inequalities around class, gender, sexuality, age, and disability benefit certain groups of others. I benefit from that white privilege, and if you're white, so do you. It's not a choice we made, but it's a fact. And significantly, we benefit from that at the cost of people of color. I am more likely to get hired than an equally competent minority, and voluntarily I am benefiting from my white privilege as part of a systematically racist society. When there is only so much of the pie to go around, yet you get more than your fair share, inevitably comes out at the cost of someone else. That's exactly what the bank in question is probably going to get away with. Because my family, my new family, my Latin family, was ignorant, due to no fault of their own, that they needed to appear in court and say, hey, look, and if they would have known that, they could have done that. But my mother-in-law died way sooner than she was supposed to. So she wasn't able to appear in court. She didn't know. And so now that formality is going to probably allow the bank to take her home. I'm sure most of the people were upset with the model statements would never be racially abusive or violent. But in a society that is still too skewed in favor of white people at the cost of anyone else, that is not enough. As that model stated, institutionalized systematic racism is just as damaging as a violent racist attack. She didn't cause offense because she was wrong. She caused offense because she highlighted an uncomfortable truth, that being unracist is not the same as being anti-racist. Any white person who is serious about racial equality has to be anti-racist. This requires us to actively acknowledge our privilege, because that privilege, even though we never asked for it, is the very cause of the inequality suffered by others. Only then can we be part of a meaningful solution to the institutional racism. We have a choice: be offended or be part of the solution, but we can't be both. I've learned not to be bristle at the statement, all white people are racist. Instead, I've learned to listen to the pain, injustice, and yes, the accuracy in this statement. Just like I learned to recognize those subtle situations where my race made my life easier and someone else's life harder. Every day, I am still unlearning subconscious prejudices and checking my thoughts, actions, and languages for hidden bias. because I would rather acknowledge those faults now than look back in years to come and know that I could have done more to be on the right side of history. As Martin Luther King once said, the privileged have a responsibility to do what they know is right. Right now, when a black woman is being attacked by opposing structural racism, that means standing shoulder to shoulder with this model that was brave enough to stand on social media. If you're a white person reading this, I hope you'll do the same. This all hits close to home, my home, with my wife. My wife might lose her home because of the complicated, well-managed legal racism and greed because of her parents' last name wasn't white.